ever since the Shroud first really appears in history, there's been controversy about it, and there have been questions about its authenticity.
In 2025, a team of scientists turned an advanced artificial intelligence system on the Shroud of Turin, hoping to settle a centuries-old debate once and for all. What the machine found stopped the experiment cold. Data froze, alarms triggered, and researchers were left staring at something that defied every known law of science. No one could agree on what the AI had uncovered, only that it was hidden deep within the cloth, and it changed everything. The machine that found God's code. In 2025, inside a temperature-controlled laboratory in northern Italy, a powerful artificial intelligence system was analyzing microscopic digital scans of the Shroud of Turin. The linen many believe once wrapped the body of Jesus Christ described in John 26:7. The AI's task was to detect any structural or chemical irregularities in the fibers. For hours, the data streamed smoothly across the screens, until the process suddenly paused. The system had reached a threshold where its algorithms detected something it could not immediately classify. A notification appeared on the central monitor. Anomalous pattern detected. The lead researcher thought it was a glitch, but when they restarted the sequence, the same message appeared again. At that moment, the team realized the AI had found something entirely unexpected, an underlying mathematical structure hidden within the fabric. What came next would shake both science and religion to their core. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has been one of the most argued-over relics on Earth. It measures 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide, and its faint, ghostly image of a man bears wounds consistent with crucifixion. To believers, it is the burial cloth of Christ. To skeptics, it is an extraordinary medieval forgery. Historical records show its first public display in France around 1354, and ever since, the debate has raged about whether it is sacred truth or clever deception. Over time, the arguments have grown stranger. Some claimed the shroud was created with primitive photography, using silver salts and sunlight. Others said it was painted with blood and sweat from a dying monk. A few insisted it was a deliberate hoax made to draw pilgrims and money to a struggling church. More extreme voices claimed the image was burned onto the cloth by energy from a meteor strike, or that it was proof of ancient extraterrestrial technology used to record human life. Others even suggested it was an early hologram left behind by time travelers. None of these theories ever gained serious evidence, but they showed how far people were willing to go to explain something that should not exist. Even today, the shroud divides experts. Scientists admit that no known method of painting, dyeing, or burning could reproduce its microscopic precision. Every few decades, new tests reopen the debate, and each time the mystery only deepens. Every time the scientists tried to disprove the result, they got the same outcome. The AI's data logs showed exact numerical ratios that kept repeating within the linen's microscopic fibers. These numbers formed a consistent and organized pattern inside the cloth, even though the weave itself appeared random to the human eye. The system recorded these as consistent numeric relationships. When the scientists compared them to known natural and artistic patterns, none matched. The sequence was far too complex for any known medieval process. It was neither a painting nor a natural imprint. It was a data structure. The research team decided to double-check the AI's findings using different analysis programs. They removed every visible part of the image, keeping only the numerical data the AI had collected from the fibers. The same pattern appeared again. This proved that the result was not caused by lighting or photography errors. The AI had detected a consistent sequence of numbers that repeated inside the cloth itself. In simple terms, the fabric contained a built-in structure that followed a precise mathematical order. To the scientists, it looked similar to how modern computers store digital information. The data seemed to be arranged in a logical format, as if it had been programmed or recorded in some way. That made no sense, because digital encoding technology did not exist until thousands of years later. For many believers, this discovery was emotional. They saw it as possible evidence of divine design, a trace of order within what should be chaos. It reminded some of Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. The more the experts analyzed the results, the harder it became to explain them. The Shroud of Turin could no longer be dismissed as a simple medieval artifact. It now appeared to contain information that pointed to something intelligent and purposeful, something science could not yet understand. To grasp the full weight of what the AI uncovered, we must look closer at the image itself, the centuries-old portrait of a crucified man that modern technology still cannot explain. The 3D corpse that shouldn't exist. The Shroud of Turin shocked the world for the first time in 1898. An Italian lawyer and amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was given rare permission to take its first ever photographs. When he developed the negatives, he was stunned. The negative image produced a clear, lifelike positive image of a man's face and body. This meant that the shroud acted like a photographic negative centuries before photography was even invented. Scientists and religious scholars could not explain how such an effect could exist on an ancient piece of cloth. When the shroud was examined under microscopes, experts noticed something even stranger. The image was not made of paint, pigment, or dye. There were no brush strokes, no signs of chemical application, and no evidence of a human hand at work. Instead, the image existed only on the very surface of the linen. It affected just the outermost fibers, each one thinner than a human hair without soaking into the threads beneath. The coloration appeared as if the top layer of fibers had been lightly scorched or dehydrated by an intense burst of energy. Scientists could not find any natural or mechanical process that could reproduce this same effect. Over the years, more advanced tests revealed that the image contained measurable three-dimensional data. This means the brightness of every pixel corresponded exactly to the distance between the cloth and the body it once covered. When the data was processed through a NASA image analyzer in the 1970s, the computer generated a perfectly proportioned 3D model of a human figure. The result was impossible to explain using any known artistic or photographic technique from the Middle Ages. It was as if the image had recorded real depth information, something that could only happen if the cloth had been briefly suspended over an actual body. This discovery reignited worldwide attention. Believers saw it as physical proof of Luke 24:39, where the resurrected Jesus says, "Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see." To them, the shroud was not an artistic representation. It was a physical witness to the resurrection itself. The wounds on the image lined up perfectly with descriptions of crucifixion, punctures in the wrists and feet, a gash on the side, and blood flows matching the direction of gravity. Skeptics, however, offered many explanations. Some said it was a clever medieval trick created by heating a sculpture and pressing linen against it. Others claimed it was painted using a primitive photographic process involving light-sensitive chemicals. A few even suggested it was a random stain pattern mistaken for a face. Yet every attempt to recreate the shroud using these methods failed. None could duplicate its microscopic detail, its non-directional shading, or its perfect 3D accuracy. The scientific community was left in confusion. The shroud behaved like a real photograph, but came from a time when cameras did not exist. It carried depth data centuries before anyone understood how to encode it. Every new test only deepened the mystery. The question that haunted researchers was simple. If no human made it, what kind of force did? Some physicists proposed that the image might have been created by an intense flash of radiation, perhaps from a single burst of ultraviolet light. Others said the effect could have been caused by something far beyond our known physics, like an event that changed both matter and energy at the same moment. As scientists ran out of physical explanations, they began to look deeper. They turned to digital analysis, hoping that advanced artificial intelligence could uncover hidden structures and information that the human eye could never see. The hidden blueprint beneath the flesh. When scientists used artificial intelligence to clean up the high-resolution digital scans of the Shroud of Turin, they expected clearer images of the face and body. Instead, they uncovered something entirely different. Once the visual noise was removed, the AI revealed patterns that were not part of the visible image. Inside the cloth's microscopic structure were repeating shapes and mathematical relationships. Circles, spirals, and intersecting lines appeared across the areas of the face, hands, and torso. These shapes were not random. They followed exact numerical proportions that matched one another across the cloth, showing a level of precision that could not have been accidental. When the researchers measured these proportions, they found ratios nearly identical to the golden ratio, a mathematical constant found throughout nature, art, and architecture. The same ratio was used in the design of ancient temples and cathedrals. Scholars noticed that the spacing of certain patterns matched geometric layouts described in 1 Kings 6, which details the construction of Solomon's temple. The precision of the patterns was so exact that they appeared to be organized by an underlying mathematical rule rather than human artistry. The AI's data models confirmed that the patterns repeated consistently through the entire image, even in areas where the visible features were faint or missing. This suggested that the design was built into the structure of the fibers themselves, not added later by human hands. The researchers struggled to find an explanation. No known medieval technique could create such microscopic geometric alignment. It did not resemble painting, burning, or staining. Instead, it looked like a kind of coded structure, almost as if the cloth had captured an event through a physical process rather than artistic creation. Some scientists began to describe the shroud as a data map, a visual record of a real moment that had left measurable traces of energy or information behind. They compared it to how digital sensors today record light, heat, or radiation. One expert called it a physical blueprint of a transformation, suggesting that the event that created the image might have imprinted its energy pattern directly into the fibers. Others went even further, proposing that the linen might have acted like an early form of data storage, preserving not just an image, but the entire geometry of the human form it covered. This new discovery reignited a centuries-old argument between faith and science. To many believers, the findings were proof of divine design. They saw the geometric order as a form of God's signature written into matter, echoing Psalm 104:24, which says, "How many are your works, Lord? In wisdom you made them all." To skeptics, the results were deeply troubling. The evidence did not point to a forgery, but neither could it be explained by known science. It challenged everything they thought they knew about how the shroud could have been made. By this stage, the scientific team realized they were no longer studying an image. They were studying a phenomenon that connected physics, biology, and mathematics in a way no artifact ever had. The cloth seemed to carry the fingerprints of both creation and decay at the same time. Yet despite these extraordinary findings, the world had once dismissed the Shroud of Turin as a medieval fake. The reason lay in a single flawed experiment that shaped public opinion for decades, and almost buried the truth forever. The patch, the fire, and the lie. In 1988, 3 separate laboratories, one in Oxford, one in Zurich, and one in Tucson, were given tiny samples of the Shroud of Turin for radiocarbon dating. When the results were released, they shocked the world. All 3 labs concluded that the cloth originated between 1260 and 1390. Newspapers across the globe ran the same headline, "Shroud proven fake." For many, that was the end of the story. The shroud, they said, was nothing more than a clever medieval forgery. The church quietly accepted the results, and the world moved on. But something was wrong. The piece of fabric used for the test had been taken from one small area near the edge of the shroud. This section looked slightly different in color and texture, but the difference was dismissed as aging or damage. Years later, new research revealed that this particular corner had been repaired after a devastating fire in 1532, when molten silver from a reliquary burned through parts of the cloth. Medieval nuns had carefully sewn in new threads to restore the damaged area. The test sample had come from that repaired patch, not from the original linen. American chemist Raymond Rogers, who had been part of the original scientific team, re-examined fibers from the same area using chemical and microscopic analysis. What he found changed everything. The tested fibers contained cotton blended with dye and gum, materials commonly used in medieval repairs. The rest of the cloth, however, was made of pure linen spun in a style typical of ancient Middle Eastern weaving. The difference was undeniable. Rogers's results showed that the tested material was chemically younger than the rest of the shroud. The 1988 dating had been based on contaminated and altered threads. This revelation triggered outrage among both believers and scientists. Many asked how such an important test could have relied on a sample from a visibly repaired section. Some accused the church of allowing the flawed test to avoid deeper scrutiny, fearing either scandal or confirmation of something beyond explanation. Others believed skeptics had rushed to close the case because the true age of the shroud would threaten long-standing assumptions about faith and science. In the years that followed, independent researchers used new methods such as vibrational spectroscopy, Raman analysis, and textile comparison studies. These tests did not rely on carbon decay, but on the molecular aging of the linen. The results pointed consistently toward a much older origin, somewhere around the 1st century, aligning with the time of Jesus of Nazareth. As new data emerged, it became clear that the story of the shroud had been shaped as much by human error and politics as by science. The cloth that many thought had been debunked was once again at the center of mystery. With the carbon dating discredited, researchers returned to the shroud with new tools and open minds. This time, they would search for signs of energy, information, and perhaps something even closer to divine light itself. The cloth that sang to the machines. When the AI team continued its deeper analysis of the Shroud of Turin, they shifted from studying geometry to studying energy. The earlier scans had already revealed precise mathematical ratios woven into the fibers, but now the system began converting those same numerical patterns into another form of data: frequency. When the geometric alignments were processed through frequency conversion, a method used to translate numerical ratios into sound, the patterns produced pure harmonic tones. The tones followed the same numerical patterns used in ancient religious music and temple design. When scientists looked closer, they realized that these numbers matched exact sound intervals first described by the Greek mathematician Pythagoras more than 2,000 years ago. Pythagoras taught that the entire universe worked according to simple mathematical ratios, the same ones that create musical harmony. In ancient belief, this was called the music of the cosmos, meaning the universe itself was built on orderly sound and vibration. When the team used the AI to turn the shroud's geometric ratios into sound, the results were clear. The system produced smooth, perfectly tuned musical notes that followed those same ancient harmonies. It was not random noise. The shroud seemed to hold a pattern of order and balance, almost like a hidden song preserved in the threads of the fabric. Physicists who examined the results suggested a possible explanation known as energy resonance. They believed the image on the shroud might have formed when a sudden, powerful burst of electromagnetic radiation hit the linen. This type of energy could temporarily rearrange the surface molecules of the fabric without burning through the deeper layers. In scientific terms, that would explain why the image only appears on the very top fibers of the cloth and does not penetrate below them. The entire event, if it really happened, would have lasted less than a billionth of a second. It would have been too fast for heat or fire to spread, yet strong enough to leave behind a perfect photographic imprint of a human body. Theologians saw this idea differently. They believed the same energy could represent the power of creation itself, a sign of divine order. They referred to Psalm 156, which says, "Let everything that has breath praise the Lord." To them, finding measurable harmony and structure inside the shroud meant that even the fabric of the world could respond to God's power. In this view, the shroud might not just show a man's image, but also the trace of a real moment when physical matter reacted to something beyond human understanding. Speculation intensified when a group of researchers noticed that the geometric ratios matched architectural dimensions found in sacred sites such as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and the Great Basilica in Rome. Both structures were designed using measurements based on early musical intervals believed to reflect divine proportion. If those patterns existed in the shroud, then the cloth's design might have followed the same cosmic principles used in ancient temples. It was as though light, sound, and structure had converged in one mysterious moment captured on a simple piece of linen. The Vatican made no official statement about the finding, but quiet discussions began among both theologians and physicists. Some scientists argued that the harmonic resonance could be a natural byproduct of the imaging process. Others wondered if it represented something far more powerful. A few pointed to Matthew 28:2, which describes the moment of resurrection. There was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven. They asked whether the shroud might have actually recorded that very event, a burst of radiant energy so intense that it imprinted both light and structure onto the cloth in a fraction of a second. The evidence left the boundary between science and faith blurred once again. The shroud was no longer viewed as mere cloth with an image. It had become a multidimensional artifact, a relic that responded to machines not with static data, but with harmony, order, and energy. Yet as researchers probed deeper into the fabric's mysteries, their attention shifted from physics to biology. What they found next, hidden in microscopic traces of blood, would not bring peace or clarity. It would bring fear. The blood that shouldn't exist. When scientists turned the AI's attention to the reddish stains scattered across the Shroud of Turin, they expected to confirm what decades of testing had already shown, that the marks were real human blood. What they did not expect was for the AI-assisted genetic analysis to return data that didn't match anything in modern science. Geneticists extracted and examined fragments of mitochondrial DNA, which is the genetic material passed down from mothers to their children. This type of DNA helps scientists trace human ancestry and compare it with known populations across the world. But when the AI compared the data from the Shroud to global and ancient DNA databases, the results were confusing. Several sequences didn't correspond to any recorded human lineage. The patterns were close to human, but not identical. One researcher described it carefully as a human profile, but not entirely human. This result shook both scientists and theologians. For believers, it echoed the words of John 1:14, which says, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." That verse refers to Jesus Christ taking on human form while still being divine. If the blood on the shroud truly came from the man depicted on it, and if the DNA was not completely human, then the finding might suggest a biological sign of that dual nature, both human and something beyond human understanding. From a scientific standpoint, the data made no sense. Mutations could not explain the differences, and contamination would have made the sample unreadable, not unique. The findings suggested the blood carried markers that existed outside any known human evolutionary path. For many in the scientific community, this was impossible. For many in the faith community, it was confirmation of what had always been claimed, that this cloth once touched the body of someone who did not fit within the limits of ordinary biology. The idea left scientists and believers struggling with the same question. Had the shroud captured not just an image of death, but the biological fingerprint of resurrection itself? But before the research team could agree on how to interpret it, the AI system delivered one final discovery, a result so strange and unsettling that even the scientist began to wonder whether the machine had crossed the line between analysis and revelation. When the cloth spoke back. In the final stage of the AI project, researchers decided to re-examine the high-resolution scans one last time. They instructed the system to search for any patterns that might resemble language, just to rule out coincidences. What appeared on the screen left the entire team silent. When the program enhanced the chest area of the image, it detected faint, letter-like shapes that followed consistent spacing and alignment. After cross-referencing them with ancient writing samples, linguists confirmed that several of the markings matched characters from early 1st century Aramaic, the language spoken in Jerusalem during the time of Jesus. The symbols were incomplete but recognizable. Together they formed fragments of short phrases that could be translated as, "I am beyond life, not flesh." The team verified that these shapes were not caused by pigment or burn marks. They were subtle distortions in the fibers themselves, as if the threads had been rearranged microscopically during the event that created the image. Some scientists believed it was a coincidence. Others argued that the letters were too structured to be random. No other ancient textile in the global databases showed a similar pattern. Linguists confirmed that the phrase followed proper Aramaic grammar, but they could not explain how it could appear on a fabric dated to the 1st century without any known writing tools or ink. The discovery reignited both scientific and theological debate. Some experts suggested that the shroud might have recorded a kind of physical shockwave that briefly altered the structure of the fibers in patterns resembling human language. Theologians drew comparisons to John 11:25, where Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life." To them, the phrase on the shroud echoed that same promise, that life could overcome death through divine power. Religious authorities issued no public comment, though it quickly limited access to the new AI data. Rumors spread that similar letter formations had been detected in other holy relics, but none were verified. For many people, the new findings brought science and faith closer together instead of dividing them. What started as a centuries-old relic had become a bridge between technology and belief. The Shroud of Turin now appeared to contain information that neither side could fully explain, yet both had to acknowledge. Whether the patterns came from a natural event or something beyond human power, they revealed a depth of order that no one expected. To scientists, it is a mystery that expanded the limits of knowledge. To believers, it showed that faith and science do not have to conflict. Both can point toward the same truth in different ways. What do you think about the AI interpretations? Comment down below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.